Hi, I'm Creative Grids designer Deb Heatherly, and in the studio today is my good friend Keisha Orser. Keisha has been working on a very special project using the pattern Daddy's Ties and the Creative Grids Kitty Corner tool. Keisha, tell us about your project.
I was lucky enough to inherit a lot of ties from my father, who was a blue water ocean sailboat racer, and his hobby was golf. So lots of the ties have motifs for those two hobbies. Let me show you some of them. This tie, we worked very hard to center the sailboat on. The next one shows a golfer centered on the tie. Sometimes the ties had words. This one is really cute. It says TGIF. Usually we think that means thank God it's Friday, but to sailors it means thank God it floats, and we're able to say that right up here in the knot portion of the tie. This one has a motorboat down here, but we were able to center the front door of the house up here in the knot. This one has a church steeple and the American flag centered in the knot. Sometimes we were lucky enough to be able to get two blocks from the same tie. This one, the knot says yachting and has a picture of racing sailboats, and we were also able to center a second motif that says yachting on the bottom of the tie. This one, we were able to center the signal flags on the knot of the tie. Deb's going to show you how we did this.
The first step was to check all of the ties to see if they needed cleaning. You're not supposed to launder ties, so you can only spot clean if necessary. We were very lucky that none of Keisha's ties needed to be spot cleaned. So the first step is to take off the label on the back of your ties. Just use your seam ripper and be very careful. Normally there's only a few stitches. The next step is to take off the tack that's at this end of the tie and the other end of the tie. Then here's a little trick that we learned that worked on most of the ties, was to get this thread started about 6 inches on each end. And then if you're lucky, you can pull that thread out as one piece. Let's see if it works on this one. It sure saved a lot of time when it worked, that's for sure. In the meantime, you're going to want to be heating your iron for adding your stabilizer once these are deconstructed. Okay, fingers crossed. You can see how this will speed up things immensely if this thread will come out in one piece. Yay! Now you've got to take out all of this insides. Oh, this one has some extra stitching here. And you've got more lining to take out, but we just took our scissors and snip this really close rather than dealing with more threads. And when you're lucky, you can just rip out this part without hurting the tie. All right, so once that's done, you want to add stabilizer. You want to be careful with your iron because some ties do not like intense heat. And what type of stabilizer? This is just a very lightweight fusible. It's the same fusible that I use with t-shirts, and it is actually Pilon 906F. So let's back up just a minute and talk about kitty cornered units and the kitty cornered tool, because that's what we're using to make these ties. Now normally with your kitty cornered tool, to make your A units, the part that looks like a tie, you start with a square, fold it in half, place your tool, step 1, and cut your A unit. We didn't do that for the tie quilt and the ties because we wanted to use the most of the tie possible. So we created a template, and we'll show you how to do that in a minute. Normally, again, for kitty cornered units, your B units, the parts that go on the side, start as a rectangle. Step 2. And then you add smart corners with the step 3 part of the tool. Now, if you had shirts, men's shirts that you wanted to use with the ties, that would be awesome with this. Just make sure that they're lightweight and will sew into your units. So this is how you would normally construct your kitty cornered units, matching your smart corner, sewing a 1/4 inch from the edge, pressing away from the A unit, and then aligning the other side, turning it over to do your seams so that you always start from the wide section of the tie. So to make the most use of our ties, instead of cutting a square from the tie, we cut a square from a piece of paper, and your pattern will tell you what size you need to cut. We used the tool to create our A unit with paper. You could also use freezer paper. Now, because we were making so many blocks, we then used our paper to trace a plastic template. And that's what we used to fussy cut those motifs that she showed you on those ties. We also did the same thing for the half square triangles that make the knot in the tie. Normally, you would cut a square, draw a diagonal line, and sew a 1/4 inch on either side. We cut the square, but we oversized it a little to 2 3/4 instead of the 2 1/2 that the pattern tells you to cut. We then cut this in half, again making sure that we use as much of the tie as possible. We created a plastic template from that piece of paper, and that's how she was able to fussy cut the little American flag and all of the wonderful little things on the knot. So the stabilizer is on this tie already. Here's what we did. So that we didn't take a chance of cutting the plastic, we drew around our template. Now you can either cut that with scissors or use the edge of any of your rulers, laying that carefully where you drew and cutting out your A unit. I think it's a little more precise, and I think it's a little faster if you use your rotary cutter, but your scissors will work just fine as well. Oops, there's a few threads in there. Extra steps, but so worth it when you look at the heirloom quilt that she's creating.
Once we have the A unit made, then we squared it to the proper size per the pattern, simply added a rectangle here, and then another rectangle to our half square triangle. Then we have the Daddy's Tie unit.
And how many blocks did we make?
We needed 30 to make the quilt behind us.
So let's talk about that quilt. So how do you plan to take your 30 blocks and finish your quilt?
Well, I'm going to copy you and use khaki in the alternate block. I think it represents the khaki pants my dad would wear with the white shirt. And then I'm going to use the narrow leftover pieces of the tie, which I have stabilized, to become this inner border. And then, of course, Dad always wore a navy blazer with his khaki pants, so I plan on having a navy out here in the outer border.
That will be awesome. But what if you don't have as many ties as she had? What if you only have a few? but you want to share them with a lot of the family. This is a new pattern. Daddy's Ties Pillow. You can probably get 1 or 2 ties, depending on how you fussy cut, for your center. But I used the leftover skinny pieces as an inner border. So this actually took 1 entire tie to create. And this was a lot of fun to do. This, just like the Daddy's Tie Quilt, are cut loose press patterns. And you can find those at your local quilt shop, or you can find them on my website. Until next time, happy stitching.